Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's show is brought to you by SaneBox. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Why don't we dive right in today and talk about some of the news stories and reviews and links that we had on the site. And I guess I'll lead off because I wrote a review this week of Coppice, which is a Mac app for organizing notes and research. And this category has really got my attention because
this is sort of your kind of app.
It is, and it's become just a thing because you and I have kind of I guess we've had the journey with craft, and we've done we use other apps. There's this continuum of everything from something that's very text based, like craft, which benefits from things like backlinking to allow you to create kind of a web of knowledge of things that you want to write down. And on the other end of the spectrum is everything that's very visual, something like MindNode, for instance, which has a lot of elements of an outline and in fact has its own outline mode, but at its core is all about the visual. This app, Coppice, lies somewhere in between those two ends of the spectrum, although I would say it's a little closer to the text end because it really the idea of it is that you're creating pages. Everything's based on a page, and you have a canvas where you place the pages, and then the pages are connected with lines. You link between them, but what you're linking is linking text within a page. So it's very much almost like a diagram of a website when you really think about it, because you have a page and you have links on that page. Those links lead to other pages, but it's all done in a visual style that's very much like a mind map or a diagramming app, so you can see the connections between things. And it's pretty new. It came out in the fall, and it's been updated a couple of times since then. And it's got an enormous amount of potential. I mean, of course, I would like to see it on more platforms. I'd like to see it on the iPad, for instance. But it's especially if you're the type of person who thinks in more of a written format, if you're a writer or a student taking notes, that kind of thing, this is a great app to take a look at because it's got a lot of neat features. Of course, it handles things like images too, but more than anything, it really shines when it comes to text and kind of connecting ideas together.
Yeah, this is a very nice looking app. It should totally be on iPad though.
Right.
I really feel like the visual sort of tactile approach to dragging and dropping things, it will really work well on iPad. So I hope the developer is bringing it to iPad. John, do you know what, because I do not, do you know what Coppice means?
I don't.
Does it? Okay.
I don't. I didn't look it up either. I probably should have, but I haven't done that.
Interesting. All right. So tell me about the latest announcements from Eve, the HomeKit accessory maker.
Yes. Well, Eve is one of the companies that has jumped on board with Thread radios very early, and they seem to really be all in. Before this week, they had already announced some of their products were incorporating Thread, their window and door sensors, as well as they have the Eve Energy smart plug. And very early on, they did a firmware update for the European plugs that added Thread to those. But now they're bringing Thread to US and UK plugs, as well as they have an all-new weather product, which is a weather sensor and screen. It's a little cube kind of that's water resistant, and you can use it outdoors. And it also, has Thread in it. And Thread is this new technology that's a little bit like Zigbee and Z-Wave, which are really old technologies that have been around for a long time, but have some real serious limitations when it comes to things like range and the amount of energy they use and security. And so Thread, while it's not new, it's been popularized in part because it's part of this new group that involves Google and Amazon and Apple and a bunch of other manufacturers as a way to try to make home automation devices more interoperable so it's less confusing to consumers. And Thread is one of the technologies that's involved with that. And Thread, as I said, has been around for a while, but it's become more popular with some of these big companies. And what it allows is it works at longer ranges using less energy and has a really robust security layer built right into it. And what's neat about it is it doesn't require any hub. That's one of the things that's great about these devices is you don't have to have one of those, dongle hubs hanging off your Wi-Fi router, because you just need what's called a border router. And one of the first things that is a border router, this is where Apple is actually at the cutting edge of something, is the HomePod Mini. So the HomePod Mini is essentially your hub for all these Thread devices. And with Eve, the reason I mentioned border routers is that these smart plugs, because they're plugged into the wall and have a constant, source of electricity, they act as border routers as well. And what that does is that as you add these border routers throughout your home, it allows you to extend the network out further and further because they boost the range of the lower power devices like window and door sensors. So it's pretty neat. And these things can, this network that's created with Thread is independent of your internet service. So if your internet goes down, they can still communicate and you can still turn your lights on and off with your phone, for instance, which is really pretty cool too. The border router acts as the gateway to the full internet. It kind of walls off all these devices from hacking, for instance, potentially, because they're not communicating directly with the open internet. They're passing through another device to get to that. So big announcement from Eve. I haven't tried any of these yet. I'm looking forward to trying them. I have used Eve smart plugs in the past and really like them. Unfortunately, I don't think the one that I have can be updated, but I'm going to probably get one of these and check it out. I mean, we got to do some experiments this summer.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the HomePod Mini and Eve Weather combo myself.
Yeah.
Because I always had trouble with those Eve Weather stations, like reaching them. I tried, for example, to put one on the balcony outside, and I had trouble accessing the data from the sensor inside because of Bluetooth.
Right.
So I'm intrigued by this all these devices supporting Thread radio. Something that I keep an eye on. All right, let me talk about something quite strange that Apple did this week. They quote unquote clarified how picking default audio apps in iOS 14.5 is going to work, or should I say not default, because Apple doesn't want you to call it picking a default music service. So in a statement to TechCrunch, they essentially said this feature is not going to allow users to pick a default music app or podcast app or audiobook app. It's going to be based on Siri intelligence. So they don't want us to think about asking Siri, play this music from Spotify as changing the default, because they're trying to spin this as Siri is going to learn from your habits. At some point, based on what you ask, it may prompt you again to pick a different application. And because this support for audio extends to podcasts and audiobooks as well, it's all based on Siri intelligence. It's more complicated than picking a default. We don't think of it as picking a default. And also their argument goes, there's no page in settings to pick a default service. Therefore, it's just a Siri feature based on the assistant's intelligence. Which, okay, I mean, as I wrote on MacStories, it kind of feels like this argument boils down to semantics at this point.
Yeah.
Because in the weeks that I've been testing Siri, even though according to Apple, based on my requests, Siri could have asked me to pick a different music application instead of Spotify. It never did. It did, in fact, stick to the default that I set weeks ago. So it kind of feels like Apple is playing a little too clever with semantics here. And I wonder if there's a contrast here that I think it's fascinating between Apple maybe wanting to keep that competitive advantage with Apple Music over Spotify by saying there's no page in settings. It's not like you can go in there and flip a toggle like you can for email clients and browsers. So maybe there's the strategy to say we're going to make it more difficult for people to use Spotify in Siri by not having a simple switch that they can just flip. At the same time, though, it kind of feels like they wanna have it all to appease any potential antitrust concerns in the US and the EU by telling regulators, but look, you can actually play music by default with Spotify if you just ask Siri. So they're trying to have it both ways, and I'm curious to see how this will work in practice, because at least from what I've seen so far in the betas, now this may change in the final release, but from what I've seen so far, you pick a service for music, you pick one for podcasts, you pick one for audiobooks, and Siri sticks to those. At least it never prompted me again on its own. So this intelligence that Apple is trying to sell, I'm not really seeing it myself.
Yeah, it's very strange. I will give Apple this, that it is consistent with the language when you try to do this, right? Because I recall you were talking about this on Connected, and you said something to the effect of, it says that it's trying to, that you're helping Siri learn or something along those lines, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is kind of what Apple's getting at, is that this is about teaching Siri to use a service, not changing a default like with a toggle. But you're right. I mean, it really hasn't changed the entire time that you've used it so far. I mean, we're still in the beta period. On the other hand, I don't know. I kind of view this as semantics as well. So who knows? We've got more Spotify news, though. What else did you write about Spotify this week?
I wanted to link to something that Spotify announced last week. It's rolling it out to English-based users. Obviously, as with other Spotify features, I still don't have it. You know, all these limited rollouts, I seem to always get them last. Get them last. But they rolled out this interesting feature for their default playlist for your liked songs. You will soon be able to filter those songs based on moods. So you will see this toolbar with buttons like happy, sad, chill, energy, workout, all these different moods, and you will be able to filter your liked songs based on the mood you're in. And of course, the workflow should be very nice there, because you will be able to pick a specific mood and then shuffle the entire playlist, which is filtered to that specific mood. And I think this is a genius feature. I cannot wait to have access to it, because I really want to try it at different times of the day. And it's the kind of thing that I wish Apple did for Apple Music.
Yeah, I would really like to see that as well. The last thing that I will mention is a story that Alex linked to this week. And I think we first saw this on Mac Rumors, but Apple has added another tool to its data privacy page, which is a tool that lets you copy your iCloud photos over to Google Photos. So, if that's something that you want to do, if you were migrating to Android, now you have a much clearer and easier path to getting your photos out of iCloud. And as I said, it does do it as a copy, and it does take, I believe, a few days. And there's like a confirmation process to make sure that it's in fact you who's asking for this to be done. But there is a process in place, as well as a support document that explains everything you have to do, which we link to on the site. All right, Federico, let's move on to Club Mac Stories. We had a really big issue this week, thanks in large measure to you and your nearly 3,000 words about your home screen. I would say that this is more than just a home screen article. This is kind of a combination of home screens and a little bit of must-have apps that at least either are your core apps or ones that you're currently testing out. Is that a fair assessment? That is correct. Okay.
That is correct. As I explained in the newsletter, for the first time in many years, in 2020, I didn't share my list of must-have apps for a bunch of reasons related to my personal life and just the fact that 2020 was a weird year. And as I mentioned before, I was still tweaking things and testing different apps. And so I shared the final result with a complete look at my home screen, from the Today page up until the very last page of the home screen in the latest issue of MacStories Weekly. And I tried to explain why I'm moving a little bit away from widgets, as well as some of the new apps that I'm testing, with a bunch of surprises that John was also surprised. from some of my picks. So it's a complete look at the different experiments that I've been running lately and the new apps that I've been testing with some new entries that people may not expect. So it was definitely fun to put together. It took me a long time to put it together, but it was fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to read that one as well. In addition, we have a giveaway in that issue of MacStories Weekly for Tayo, which is the new text editor and clipboard manager. And Alex did a collection of MagSafe chargers. So if you're wondering, what's the best MagSafe charger out there to get and what are the options, Alex has a variety of those as well. And I did a bunch of different little things this week. One was a collection of my top 5 GoodTask tips that I've been collecting. I've written a lot about GoodTask in the last couple of months, and I went through and kind of came up with the tips that I thought had the greatest application to the most people, that weren't really specific to the work that I do, but that might help people kind of set up the app if they're new to it. And then I did a shortcut that is for extracting URLs out of Craft, because that's something that I do with a couple of our podcasts, but in particular this one every single week. And it's been a big help to me because these show notes that Federico and I use to outline the episode, those links in there are all going to come out of Craft using this shortcut. Federico, why don't you tell us about what we did on App Stories this week? Because this was a fun episode. This was a really big episode for the year.
Yeah, we shared all of our wishes for shortcuts in 2021. So all the things we would like to see in shortcuts this year, from the app itself to actions, to changes to the editor, to changes to automations, new integrations we want to see for Siri, for multitasking on iPad, a whole list of stuff that we hope the Shortcuts team will be able to get to this year. Realistically, they will not, but this still should be an interesting look at the where we think Shortcuts should go in the future.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do that episode. Federico, let me tell you a little bit about SaneBox, which is our sponsor for this episode and for all of MacStories this week. It's your personal email assistant that automatically organizes your inbox, saving you a lot of time. SaneBox makes sure that you only get the most important messages delivered right into your inbox. The rest of your messages are neatly tucked away into places like the Sane Later folder or the Sane News folder for review later. And you can do things, of course, like snooze emails too, setting them aside to deal with them when you have time. And if there's something you never want to see again, you just drag it over to the Sane Black Hole folder, which is a special folder that makes sure you never have to see that email from that company or whatever it is again. It's a lot easier than unsubscribing. And on top of that, because SaneBox works with your existing email setup, there's no app to download or email account to set up. You just use it with whichever client and service that you already use. Sign up today for a 14-day free trial of SaneBox and take back control of your email. You'll see big benefits immediately, and the message count of your inbox will drop like a rock. It's fantastic. And right now, Unwind listeners and MacStories readers can receive a $25 credit automatically by going to sanebox.com/appstories. Again, that URL is sanebox.com/MacStories to get a $25 credit on a SaneBox subscription. Our thanks to SaneBox for the support of Unwind and MacStories. All right, Federico, it is time for our weekend Unwind picks, and you've got one here for me. You've got a couple of things here for me, I see.
Well, I wanted to have a couple, but I'm saving the game for next week so that I can have more playtime. I'm about 10 hours into this game. I want to have a little more, maybe try and finish the story before I talk about it. So instead, I will have a music album. So this is the new album by Electric Century. Electric Century is the side project of My Chemical Romance bass player Mikey Way and the David Debiak of Sleep Station, which is an indie rock band based in the US. This is their follow-up album to the first one that came out, I believe, like 10 years ago. It took a long time for the sequel. Now, what's fascinating about Electric Century is that this album is both an album and a graphic novel. So it's a sort of a mixed media project that kind of reminds me of what Coheed and Cambria do for their concept albums and graphic novels. It's an interesting mix of fiction and music, which I always appreciate. Artists trying to go something a little out of the ordinary, especially during these times with the pandemic, and especially now that artists cannot go on tour and have live performances. I think it's important that they try new stuff. But really, what I love about this album is it's a really good album. First of all, and I would describe it as an 80s inspired album. There's a lot of different, at least that I personally hear. There's a lot of different influences from, some parts remind me of The Killers and U2 and Bruce Springsteen, that kind of pop rock from the 80s kind of sound, kind of vibe, but in a modern, obviously with a modern sound, with a modern twist to it. And obviously it helps that, I love My Chemical Romance. So
yes.
Obviously Mikey Way is a guarantee there, but also the producer, and I believe he also plays guitar on the record, is Ray Toro, the guitar player of My Chemical Romance.
Right.
So the Ray Toro production, that attention to detail, it's the kind of album that you really want to listen to with headphones, with a really good pair of headphones to catch all of the details, all of the layers that went into this production. And I also recommend reading this interview with Mikey Way on this music website, Kerrang, that I discovered. It's a really good interview about the themes of the album and putting this together remote, obviously. But also what fascinates me is the fact that it's an album that's been in the works for several years and it's been refined, and then Ray Toro came in with his production. It's quality work, and it's a really good album. I've been listening for the past few days, and I know that I am going to purchase this and put it on my Sony Walkman in high resolution, because it's that kind of record that you really want to enjoy.
Nice. I've only listened to it through once, but I really enjoyed it too. You told me about it, and as I was getting the club newsletter together this week, I listened to the whole album and plan to listen to some more this weekend. My pick is a music pick too, and it's an album called Little Oblivions by Julianne Baker. Right.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic album. I think ran across Julianne Baker in connection with Boy Genius, which is a group that includes Phoebe Bridgers too. And you know that I'm a big Phoebe Bridgers fan. And this Little Oblivions album, there've been a few singles that have been trickling out over time, but the lion's share of it was held back until it was released just a week ago. And I've been listening to it quite a bit. I'm a big fan of Hardline, which is the opening track, as well as Heatwave, which is the second track, and Favor, which is further down in the lineup. But it's I think there's a lot of commonality here in terms of, if you're a Phoebe Bridgers fan, you would probably like this too. It's different, but it has a great emphasis on vocals and instrumentation that I don't know. It's been an album that I've found that I've really enjoyed working to over the course of the week. And so if you haven't run across this yet, definitely take a look at it, because it's a fantastic one. And I think from the reviews I've read, I think it's got quite a bit of critical acclaim across a bunch of different music websites. All right, Federico, that is it for this week's episode of Unwind. Thanks again to SaneBox for sponsoring. You can find Federico and me over at MacStories. Federico's on Twitter and Instagram too, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.